The town of Dry Creek wore the evening like a funeral shroud. The last light of day sank low across the horizon, painting the clapboard buildings in bruised shades of red and shadow. Dust swirled down the main street, caught in the restless wind, drifting like smoke from a fire no one remembered starting. A coyote's howl carried faint and thin, a reminder that hunger was never far from this land. Outside the saloon, the door banged open hard enough to rattle its hinges. A man stumbled out, clutching a bottle as though it were the last truth left in the world. His boots scuffed the dirt, dragging, uneven. His beard was wild, his eyes glazed. The eyes of a man who had long ago lost the war with himself. The whiskey on his breath was strong enough to burn the air. Behind him, clinging to his sleeve like a ghost afraid to be seen, was a girl, barefoot, thin as kindling. Her face was pale, framed by tangled black hair, her eyes wide and searching, though her lips did not part with a single word. She looked no older than 12 summers, though her silence aged her in ways a child should never carry. The man staggered into the glow of lantern light where a small crowd had gathered. Men with cards still in their hands, others with tobacco-stained teeth, laughter sharp as knives. "Deaf," the father slurred, holding the girl forward with a cruel jerk of his hand. "Can't hear nothing. Worthless in the house." "Worthless anywhere but—" he hiccuped, swallowing hard. "A man's pocket." Laughter broke across the group, ugly and loud. Coins clinked, not from compassion but from hunger for something cheaper than bread. The girl stood still, her hands folded tight before her, her eyes locked not on the crowd, but on the dirt at her feet, as if the earth might open and swallow her whole. The bidding began with jeers. $2, then 4. Someone offered a half-empty bottle instead of silver. Her father wobbled in delight at every sound, his greed louder than his shame. The girl did not cry. She did not beg. Her silence rang sharper than any scream, and there, apart from the circle, stood the rancher. A tall man, shoulders carved by years of labor, his face carved deeper still by grief. The brim of his hat shadowed most of him, but his eyes, dark and steady, watched with the stillness of a man who had lived too long among ghosts. He had come into town for nothing more than supplies, nails, feed, lamp oil. But what he saw before him pulled at something raw, buried deep where memory festered. A wife lost to sickness. A son taken by fever before his first winter. An empty ranch where the wind's howl had been his only company for years. And now this girl. Silent. Abandoned to laughter and cruelty. He stepped forward, boots crunching the dirt. His hand dipped into his coat pocket. Silver coins caught the lamplight, ringing clear as bells when he dropped them onto the barrel that served as table. More than any man had offered. More than her father deserved. The saloon crowd hushed for a breath, then roared with new laughter. "Old Caleb buying himself a bride?" one shouted. "Nah, a servant," another cackled. "Hell, maybe just wants someone to hear his cattle lowing back at him." Their words hit him like flies. Nuisance, nothing more. The rancher's gaze never left the girl. The father snatched the silver, greed glowing in his eyes, and without another glance at the daughter he'd sold, staggered off toward the saloon again. His bottle raised, his steps crooked, his shame forgotten in the thirst of his throat. The crowd dispersed slowly, chuckling, some shaking their heads, others spitting into the dust. Soon only the rancher and the girl remained, two figures in the fading light, the wind wrapping them in silence. He did not touch her, did not drag her. He simply gestured with a tilt of his head toward the waiting horse tethered by the hitching post. She hesitated, her bare toes curling against the dirt, before she moved, quiet as a shadow, quick as a deer, climbing onto the saddle. He mounted behind her, and the leather creaked under their weight. The horse snorted, restless, then set off, down the darkening road. The sounds of town, the laughter, the piano from the saloon, the clink of bottles, faded into distance. Ahead stretched only the long road into silence, broken by wind across the plain. The girl clutched the saddle horn, tight, her small fingers white. She did not look back. The rancher said nothing. His voice had grown unused, rusted with disuse. But inside him, where grief had lived so long, A new weight settled. Not a burden, not yet hope, but something else. A bond, unspoken. The prairie. Night gathered around them. A hawk circled high overhead, cutting across the dying light. Dust rose behind the horses' hooves like smoke trailing from a dying fire. Neither spoke, neither dared. But already, bound by silence and loss, they belonged to each other more than the world would ever understand. And as the wind swept the first stars into the velvet sky, the rancher knew, though he had not sought it, that his lonely life had just shifted forever. The road away from Dry Creek stretched endless and hollow, a ribbon of dirt winding into the twilight. The horses' hooves struck a slow rhythm, steady as a drumbeat at a funeral. Dust rose behind them, curling like smoke before vanishing into the dying light. The girl sat small in the saddle, her back rigid, hands gripping the worn leather horn so tight her knuckles gleamed white. She did not weep. She did not whimper. Her silence was heavier than sobs, as though all the sound had been wrung out of her long before this ride. The rancher, Caleb, watched her from the corner of his eye. She weighed nothing against him, yet her presence pressed against the hollowness inside him, filling it in strange, unsettling ways. The prairie stretched wide around them, a sea of dry grass whispering in the wind. Coyotes cried far out in the darkness, sharp and lonely. Overhead, a hawk wheeled slow circles, wings cutting across the bruised sky. When the first stars blinked awake, the girl shifted slightly, clutching tighter to the saddle horn as if it were the last tree in a flood. Caleb said nothing. His words had always been rationed, but now, in the company of a child who did not speak, his silence felt almost like understanding. Hours later, lantern light from his ranch flickered against the dark. It was no grand house, just a squat cabin weathered by storms, its roof patched, its fences scarred by wind. Beyond it, the barn leaned like an old man with tired bones. A place built not for beauty, but for survival. He swung down from the horse and helped her dismount. She stepped barefoot onto the hard-packed earth, her toes brushing cold dirt, her gaze darting from shadows to sky. She made no sound. He led her into the cabin, its wooden door groaning on rusted hinges. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and dry wood. A single lamp burned low, throwing long shadows across the walls. Caleb gestured toward a small room at the back, a bed, a thin quilt, a basin of water. No more, no less. "This is yours," he said simply. She didn't nod. She didn't bow. She just stared at him, her eyes wide and unreadable, as if testing whether his words were a truth or another cruelty. Then she stepped inside, sat on the edge of the bed, and lowered her gaze to her lap. Caleb lingered a moment, then turned away. He didn't expect thanks. He didn't want it. Days began to fold into one another like pages in a book left too long in the sun. The girl worked without being told. She swept the cabin floor, mended torn shirts with small, steady stitches, and boiled water for stew. She fed the chickens and carried buckets to the barn, her steps light, her presence nearly invisible. She never complained. She never resisted. At first, Caleb believed it was the silence of deafness, but soon he noticed things that troubled him. When a rider passed far down the road, long before hoofbeats reached his ears, her eyes snapped toward the horizon, sharp and sure. When coyotes yipped at the edge of night, she stiffened before the sound had carried. And once, when a pair of drifters whispered outside the cabin walls, thinking themselves unheard, he caught her freezing, her whole body locked as though their hushed words had struck her chest. Caleb studied her from across the room in those moments, his gaze heavy, hers distant. She pretended well, but something didn't fit. One evening, as firelight flickered low in the hearth, he sat sharpening his knife. The rasp of stone against steel echoed soft and steady. The girl knelt near the flames, her hands busy stitching a tear in her dress. The wind rattled the shutters. From far off came the faint clop of hooves, quiet, almost hidden. Her head lifted, before his ears caught it. She turned her face toward the sound, eyes narrowing as if following a signal only she could hear. Caleb paused. The knife stilled in his hand. Her gaze darted toward him, realizing he'd seen. For a heartbeat, something like fear flickered in her eyes before she lowered them again, sewing in silence. The knife rasped once more, slower now. He said nothing, but his thoughts wound dark and heavy. That night, as he lay in his bed, the cabin creaking around him, he found no sleep. The girl's silence pressed into his mind. Deaf, they said. Yet the prairie spoke to her before it spoke to him. Wind hissed through the cracks, carrying scents of sage and dust. The rafters moaned under the weight of memory. Caleb closed his eyes, but behind them he saw only her face, pale and watchful, a mask of quiet hiding something deeper. What was she keeping from him? The question turned in him like a blade, and though his house was still, though the girl made not a single sound, he knew with a certainty that echoed through the night. Her silence was not the silence of one who cannot hear. It was the silence of one who will not speak, and that truth, unspoken, carried more danger than any words ever could. The storm came without warning. By dusk, the sky had split itself wide open, swollen clouds dragging their bellies across the prairie like wounded beasts. Rain lashed against the cabin roof, steady and merciless. Wind shoved through the cracks in the shutters, howling like ghosts rattling the bones of the house. Lightning lit the land in brief, violent flashes, turning fences into jagged spears, the barn into a hulking silhouette crouched against the night. Inside, the hearth fire struggled against the storm's rage. Flames bent and snapped, casting long, trembling shadows across the walls. The girl knelt near it, her thin figure outlined by firelight, needle in hand, mending one of Caleb's old shirts. She did not look up when thunder boomed overhead, shaking the rafters. She did not flinch, not once. But when the barn door creaked, a faint, almost secret sound drowned beneath the storm. Her head lifted sharply. Her eyes darted toward the noise before Caleb's ears had even caught it. He saw it. His knife paused mid-carve on the block of wood in his hands. The storm filled the silence between them, but the truth had already landed heavy as stone. She had heard it. The girl realized too late she had betrayed herself. Her lips parted as though to excuse, to explain, but no sound came. Her small chest rose and fell, quick and shallow. She lowered her gaze to her lap, but it was useless. Her body had already spoken louder than any word. Caleb set the knife aside. Slowly, deliberately, he rose from his chair. Boots creaked on the cabin floor. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching across her small frame as another crack of lightning split the night. "You hear?" His voice was low, not sharp, but heavy. With certainty, the girl froze. The needle slipped from her fingers, vanishing into the quilt folds. For a heartbeat she remained still as carved wood. Then her lips trembled, and tears welled hot in her eyes. "No," she mouthed, silent. But the denial broke the moment it was formed. Her shoulders shook, and then, like a dam giving way, her tears spilled. They streaked her cheeks silently, rivers carving stone. Her breaths came jagged, almost soundless, like dry leaves skittering across hard ground. Finally, after days of silence, words stumbled out, fragile, halting, raw. "I hear." Her voice was a whisper, cracked from disuse. "I always did." Caleb did not move, did not speak. He let the storm outside roar while the storm within the girl poured itself into the firelight. "My father," she gasped between sobs. "He made me pretend. Said if men thought me deaf, they'd laugh, mock, but not touch." She pressed trembling hands to her ears. "It was my shield. My silence was my only way to stay safe." Her words broke into sobs, her body folding in on itself like a bird hiding its wings. Caleb's chest tightened. Memory cut through him like barbed wire. The pale face of his wife, taken by raiders, her screams swallowed by night, the still body of his boy, fever stealing the last of his breath. He knew the cruelty of this world, how it stripped the weak to bone and ash. He knelt down before her. His hands did not reach for her, not yet. His voice, when it came, was rough but steady. You carried silence, like armor. The girl lifted her wet face to him. Her eyes shimmered, full of fear, shame, and something more. A desperate hope that he might not cast her out for the lie. Caleb's jaw tightened. You shouldn't have had to. The fire popped. Wind rattled the door. Their silence this time was not empty. It was a thread binding them, pulled taut by truth. The girl whispered again, her voice barely there. If they find out, they'll take me. Call me curse, prize. Caleb's gaze darkened. He knew it was true. A girl who had fooled men, who could hear when thought deaf. That secret could fetch the wrong kind of hunger. In this land, rumor traveled faster than dust storms, and men followed both. You're safe here, he said. Only 3 words, but heavy with the weight of a vow. The girl's tears slowed. She searched his face, as though trying to measure if his silence could truly hold her fear. For the first time, her hand inched forward, resting lightly against his sleeve, small fingers against rough fabric. She did not speak again. She didn't need to. Outside, thunder rolled across the land, like cannon fire. But inside the cabin, where storm met fire, a different kind of thunder cracked, one that did not break apart, but forged something new. A secret had been born between them. Dangerous. Binding. Caleb rose, stoked the fire, and turned his gaze to the storm-torn window. Beyond the glass, darkness waited. If the world learned what he now knew, they would come, not for him, but for her, and he would be ready. For a handful of weeks, the prairie breathed easy. The girl rose with dawn, her small hands working steady as the sun spread its heat across the land. She carried water to the barn, gathered eggs, swept the dust from the cabin floor. Caleb moved beside her, wordless most days, mending fences, tending cattle, patching the roof before the next storm could tear it apart. Their lives folded into a rhythm, quiet, simple, a fragile kind of peace stitched together by shared silence. But peace in this land was like glass left on a table in the wind. Sooner or later it broke. It began in town. Riders swaggered through. Dry creek, not the kind that stayed long, but the kind who left ruin behind them. Bounty hunters, boots muddy, eyes sharp with greed. They drank hard and listened harder, their ears pressed for whispers that might buy them fortune. And they heard it. A rancher out past the South Ridge had bought a girl. Deaf, they said. Maybe not. Maybe trickster. Maybe witch. The story, twisted in the mouths of men until it became something ugly, sin worth punishing, a secret worth stealing, a prize worth gold. When the word reached Caleb, it came not by mouth but by instinct, the kind of knowing a man earned after too many years in the saddle, after too many graves dug by his own hand. He felt it in the air, the hush before a storm, the way the prairie wind turned sharp, carrying the scent of iron and violence. That evening, as the sun bled itself into the horizon, he checked the rifles. The long barrel gleamed in firelight, the weight of it familiar as an old scar. He laid out ammunition neat as prayer beads, each one a promise. The girl watched him from across the table, her hands trembling faintly as they smoothed the fabric of her skirt. "They'll come," she whispered, voice fragile but certain. Caleb did not answer. His silence was its own reply. She swallowed hard, eyes shimmering in the lamplight. I trust you." The words fell hesitant, as though they carried more danger than the hunters themselves. Her voice cracked softer. "Your silence is kinder than other men's words." Caleb's hand stilled on the rifle stock. He looked at her then, really looked, the way her shoulders carried fear but did not break, the way her eyes, though wide, held a fire deeper than she knew. He didn't speak promises. He wasn't a man of them, but he set the rifle down and met her gaze with a weight that carried its own vow. While his hands could grip a gun, no harm would reach her. The prairie night stretched long and thin. Coyotes sang far out in the dark. The fire hissed low. Caleb sat awake by the window, eyes tracing the horizon where stars met Earth, waiting for what he already knew was coming. At dawn, the girl stepped outside, barefoot in the dew. She lifted her face to the pale sky. The wind pressed against her dress, tugging, warning. Dust carried faint across the horizon. Too much dust for cattle, too much dust for a single rider. Her breath caught. She gripped the porch post with small white knuckles. Caleb joined her, rifle slung over his shoulder. His eyes narrowed, finding the same trail of dust. He spat once into the dirt, jaw tight. "They're coming," she whispered. He didn't answer. The horizon swallowed the morning sun, and in its place thundered shapes, riders, dark and hungry, tearing across the open land like wolves that had caught the scent of blood. The girl's hand brushed against Caleb's arm, seeking not protection, but proof he was real, that this silent man was not a shadow who would vanish when danger grew close. His body was steady, carved of stone. His silence spoke louder than words ever could, and together, on that porch, they stood as dust rose higher and the sound of hooves beat the earth like war drums. Night fell heavy, thick as wet wool pressed against the sky. The ranch lay in stillness, but it was the kind of stillness that lives right before a storm, the kind that makes the air taste of iron. The girl pressed herself against the cabin wall, every breath trembling. Outside, hooves drummed low, circling. Shadows moved at the edges of the lantern glow, riders sliding through the dark like wolves testing a fence. Then the silence cracked. A gunshot split the night. Wood splintered from the barn wall. The horses, in their stalls, screamed, hooves thrashing, chains clattering. Caleb answered without hesitation. From the porch, his rifle thundered. One shot, then another. Clean, deliberate. He did not curse, did not shout. His fury was wordless. Each trigger pulled with the weight of years he'd carried, loss of wife, of child, of peace. Every shot was a ledger mark against the world. The girl huddled low inside, the floor shaking beneath her as lead tore through wood. She covered her ears, though the noise pressed through her skin like thunder rolling in her bones. Her eyes flicked toward the door, toward the shadow of the man outside, her protector, fighting with the kind of silence that was louder than screams. Another gunshot. A cry outside, wet, cut short. Then fire. Flames licked at the barn's dry walls, sparks jumping high into the night. Smoke curled thick, choking the air with the stench of burning hay and blood. Caleb fought on. 2 men fell in the dust. Another staggered back, clutching his gut. Still more circled, spitting curses, revolvers flashing in the dark. And then, boots. On the porch. The cabin door buckled under a heavy kick. The girl scrambled back, her breath sharp. A man stumbled in, his face lit by the glow of fire outside. His grin was wide and rotten, teeth blackened with tobacco. He carried a knife in one hand, pistol in the other. "Well now," he drawled, voice like gravel. The little deaf bird. The girl froze, her hands shaking, but fear burned itself into something else. Her gaze landed on the lantern by the table, flame trembling inside the glass. The hunter stepped closer, knife gleaming. "Don't need ears to scream." She snatched the lantern, her small fingers gripping hard. With a cry half born of terror, half born of defiance, she hurled it down. Glass shattered. Fire roared to life at once, leaping across the floorboards, hungry and wild. The hunter cursed, stumbling back as heat seared the air between them. Flames rose high, licking toward the rafters, smoke clawing at her throat. She coughed, eyes watering, skin stinging, but she stood tall. No longer still, no longer silent. The door slammed wide. Caleb burst in, rifle swinging. His shot cracked like judgment. The hunter dropped, blood painting the floorboards before the flames claimed them. Smoke thickened. Fire spread fast, snapping beams and swallowing shadows. Caleb grabbed the girl's arm, pulling her through the choking haze. They stumbled out into the night air, collapsing against the dirt as the cabin's windows glowed orange behind them. The girl coughed, her face streaked with soot and tears. Her chest heaved, words trembling on her lips. For the first time, she didn't hold them back. "I hear you," Her voice cracked raw, breaking open years of silence. "I've always heard." "You!" Caleb turned, his face streaked with sweat, his jaw lined in ash. His eyes softened, though his body was carved of scars. He touched her shoulder gently, steady as stone. "I don't love silence," he said, voice low, ragged. "I love the soul that breaks it." Her eyes filled again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something heavier, something deeper, hope, fragile and wild. Around them, fire devoured the barn, sparks scattering into the starless sky. Blood stained the dirt, bodies lay still. Coyotes yipped far off, scenting death. But between the two of them, in the ashes of violence, something had been born. Not silence, not fear. A truth that no bullet, no flame, no man could burn away. Dawn rose slow, bleeding pale gold across the horizon. The prairie, torn by smoke and gunfire, lay hushed as if holding its breath. The night's violence had burned itself out, leaving behind only scars, blackened beams where the barn once stood, soil stained with blood, the air still carrying the ghost of fire. Caleb moved like a man carved from stone and dust. His shirt was torn, shoulder bandaged, but his stride was steady. At the edge of the ranch, he dug graves with hands blistered and raw. One by one, the bounty hunters disappeared into the earth, their greed buried beneath the same soil they had bled upon. He marked the graves only with stones, no words, no prayers. Some men didn't earn them. The girl watched from the porch, barefoot in the ash-soft dirt. She didn't tremble now. She didn't hide behind silence when Caleb's spade struck the earth. She lifted her chin higher, as though with every shovelful. A weight slid from her shoulders too. By midday, the smoke had thinned. Only the skeleton of the barn remained, its timbers black against the sky. Yet even here, amid ruin, life stirred. Chickens pecked near the fence. A horse whinnied low from the pasture, shaking soot from its mane. The world, scarred as it was, did not end. The girl stepped down from the porch, her bare feet pressing into cold earth. She walked through the ashes, through the rubble, her dress streaked with soot, her hair tangled from smoke. But her posture was different now. Not bent, not small. Her head was high. Each step carried her further from the girl who had once been dragged into town like cattle and sold for silver. Caleb saw her approach. He leaned on the spade, sweat darkening his collar, eyes lined with exhaustion. For a long moment, he only watched her, as if memorizing the way she moved in the morning light. No longer cloaked in shame or silence, when she reached him, she stopped. Ash curled at her toes, the scent of earth and smoke filling the air between them. Her voice, though trembling, did not falter. "May I stay?" she asked. Not as one bought, but as one belonging. The question hung there, fragile as glass, strong as iron. Caleb's jaw worked, but no words came. He was not a man of speeches. Too many had died on his tongue. Instead, he set down the spade, straightened his battered frame, and looked at her, with eyes that carried every unspoken vow. Then he nodded, once, slow, and in that silence she heard everything. Her breath caught. Tears threatened, but she did not let them fall. Instead, she stepped closer, standing beside him at the fresh graves, where death had tried to claim them both, but failed. Together they turned back toward the cabin. It was scarred, half-burnt, but still standing, like them. By evening, the prairie stretched wide under a sky rinsed clean by light. The wind whispered through golden fields, bending stalks of grass like waves on a quiet sea. A hawk circled above, wings wide, free and untethered, riding the currents higher and higher. The girl leaned against the porch rail, watching it. Caleb sat beside her, silent as always, but his silence was no longer empty. It was a silence filled with choice, with trust, with the echo of words he had spoken the night before. I don't love silence. I love the soul that breaks it. And now, There was nothing left to hide. No chains, no masks. From ashes and silence, they had forged something new, not a bargain, not a cage, a home.